There have been countless unforgettable and mind-blowing moments in video games over the decades. Ever since developers were able to transform sprites and polygons into captivating narratives, creators have continued to find innovative and intriguing ways to tell their stories. Shocking reveals, hard-hitting deaths, and ambiguous endings are all effective ways in which games have succeeded in surprising us. However, nothing makes plots more enthralling than a great twist. So let's take a look at some video game rug pulls that were just absolute brilliance. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 best everything you know is a lie moments in video games. Oh yeah, and also massive spoilers for the following games. Number 10. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, a secret Soviet spy. Though the Call of Duty franchise is best known for its high-octane action and big-budget spectacle, the series isn't all mindless action. Alongside a selection of jaw-dropping moments in Modern Warfare 2 and Black Ops, Cold War stands out as being one of the biggest and most unexpected gotcha moments in the entire series. Set in the early 1980s, Cold War sees player character Bell recruited by the CIA as part of a team tasked with eliminating dangerous Soviet spies. Teaming up with fan-favorite characters Woods and Mason, we're told that Bell has known the team for years, serving with leaders Adler and Sims in Vietnam. With the second mission Fractured Jaw framed as a flashback of Bell's time in Vietnam searching for a Russian presence, there's no reason to believe anything is awry. Towards the finale, however, a bombshell revelation reveals that Bell was previously one of Perseus's associates. After being left for dead, the CIA recovered him and subsequently brainwashed him into believing that they were allies. Understanding the truth about the shady practices of the US government, players now have the choice whether to tell Adler where Perseus is or lie, and in one ending, even ambush him. Number 9. Dark Souls. Anor Londo isn't what you think. Throughout the opening hours of Dark Souls, our chosen undead has the pleasure of exploring and repeatedly dying in a selection of environments equally as bleak and decrepit as the last. From the crumbling structures of Undead Burg, the slimy bowels of the depths, and the poison-filled nightmare that is Blighttown, none of these areas can be described as being particularly pleasant. And by the time we reach the end of Sen's fortress and slay the Iron Golem, we've come to accept that there's only more misery and bleakness ahead. And that's when Dark Souls transports us into Anor Londo, a large new area blanketed in welcoming sunlight. And even though this level is by far the most difficult yet, the welcome change of scenery suggests that there's still some hope left for the dying lands of Lordran. However, remember, this is Dark Souls, and nothing joyful is allowed to exist, not even sunshine. After meeting Guinevere, players can now see Anor Londo for what it truly is, as attacking Guinevere will reveal that she and the sunshine are nothing but an illusion. With the magic destroyed, the area is plunged into darkness as the soundtrack becomes more sinister. Anor Londo, it seems, is just as hopeless as everywhere else. Number 8. Braid, the real villain. From the ingenious mind of Jonathan Blower, who'd later go on to create The Witness, Braid is a challenging indie platformer in which the protagonist Tim is on a quest to save the princess from a horrible and evil monster. Presented in a storybook-like style alongside a beautiful soundtrack, Braid's premise is as basic as a plot can get, well, at least at first glance. As the game progresses and Tim unlocks more time-manipulating powers to traverse the progressively harder levels, more is gradually unveiled about the relationship between Tim and the princess. It turns out that they were once close until Tim drove her away because of an unspecified mistake, and it's not until the final level where Braid flips everything on its head. Here the goal is to now catch up with the princess as she flees from who we assume to be the villain, but when we actually do reach her, the game reveals the reality of the situation. It transpires that we'd seen this event in reverse. In actuality, the princess has been running from Tim the entire time and using the traps to slow him down. The truth is that Tim was the villain of the story the entire time. Number 7. The Dark Pictures Anthology, Little Hope, The Bus Driver. The second installment in Supermassive Games is the Dark Pictures Anthology. Little Hope continued the studio's style of atmospheric choose-your-own-adventure horror. This time, the series takes the scares to a small town with witchy secrets. And the horror begins when a bus crash strands a group of college students and their professor in the titular town in the dead of night, with the town being deserted apart from some spooky apparitions and supernatural fog keeping them there. So the group's only option is to find the bus driver who went missing after the crash. What follows is the player making a series of crucial decisions that determine who survives to sunrise and who is brutally killed. And being a lovely homage to schlocky horror, it's only fitting that Little Hope had a monster of a twist right at the end. Because the reason the group couldn't find the bus driver was because Will Poulter's character was the driver the entire time. And in an extra twist, the bus driver was the survivor of the house fire at the start of the game. Everything we've just seen was a hallucination brought on by the driver's traumatic past, with our choices determining if he's able unable to forgive himself. Number 6. Prey 2017, It's a Simulation. Although this reveal happens in the opening of the game, this twist was nevertheless a huge surprise. Beginning in protagonist Morgan Yu's apartment, the start of Arcane Studios' Prey sees Morgan set off for work like it was any other day. They dress, have a look around the spacious home, and make their way to the roof where a helicopter is waiting to take them to their place of work. But the first sign that something isn't right is that Morgan's job consists of performing rudimentary tests like hiding and pressing buttons, and things get weirder when a shape-shifting alien attacks the observing scientist. A cut to black sees Morgan wake up back in their apartment, but this time things take a sinister turn. The friendly engineer who greeted you previously is now dead, and a mysterious caller instructs you to leave the building immediately. Breaking the apartment window is the only means of escape. However, rather than leading outside, it opens into the lab's corridors. Morgan, it turns out, has been on a space station called Talos 1 this entire time and has been used as a guinea pig in an experiment of his own creation. And now, Morgan must find a way to escape this alien-infested place. Number 5. Dead Space, Nicole's True Fate. When it comes to horror characters, none have as harrowing an ordeal as engineer Isaac Clarke from the Dead Space series. And even before he has the pleasure of injecting a terrifyingly large needle into his eyes in the sequel, he has to fight his way through the claustrophobic and necromorph-infested hallways of the Ishimura. When contact with the mining vessel was lost, Isaac is sent as part of a rescue team, and with his girlfriend Nicole still on board the Ishimura, Isaac has a personal connection to the mission. After being stranded on the Ishimura and learning more about the grim fate of the crew and the mysterious artifact known as the Maker, Isaac eventually contacts and reunites with Nicole soon after. Together once again, the pair are set to travel down to the planet to destroy the artifact, but when Isaac arrives, he's told the unnerving truth that Nicole has been dead this entire time, taking her own life in the video message we see Isaac watching at the start of the game. This Nicole that we've been seeing was a hallucination created by the Marker to manipulate Isaac into fulfilling its ghastly bidding. Number 4. Spec Ops: The Line, War Trauma. Oh look, it's what culture's favourite child, it's Spec Ops: The Line, and yes, we're going to talk about it one more time for those in the back who don't know about it. Now, as Captain Martin Walker, we are on our way to find Conrad, who is basically our version of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now if it was a video game. And along the way we witness the horrors the Colonel left in their wake, and is likewise forced to commit morally questionable acts of violence himself. But not long into the campaign, Spec Ops becomes less of a conventional shooter and more of a provocative character study, because when Walker finally arrives where Conrad is holed up, everything changes. It turns out that Conrad has been dead the entire time. The Conrad that Walker had been communicating with up until this point has been a hallucination that he created to take responsibility for his own horrific actions. No matter which ending players choose, Spec Ops: The Line is a profound examination of trauma. Number 3. Shadow of the Colossus, the Colossi weren't evil. The plot of Shadow of the Colossus was so simple and perfectly executed that it's likely nobody saw the ending coming. At the start of the game, the protagonist Wanda brings the body of his recently deceased friend Mono to a sacred temple. It's here the disembodied voice of a godlike being called Dormin informs him that it is possible to reclaim her soul if Wanda succeeds in destroying the idols in the temple. To do so, however, Wanda must travel across the lands and defeat gigantic stone beasts, each of which represents one of the idols. But there is, however, a price to pay for these actions. As far as objectives go, Wanda's couldn't be more straightforward, and with the goal of bringing back his loved one, players likewise have no reason to question the morality of his intentions. But slaying each of the colossi begins to have a physical toll on Wanda, who grows paler and more sicklier as the game progresses. It's only with the death of the final colossi that players realize that they've actually been deceived. The beasts were preventing the malevolent Dormin from escaping his imprisonment, and you foolishly released him by killing innocent creatures. Number 2. Bioshock, Would You Kindly. In the opening of Bioshock, mute protagonist Jack is in a plane crash and, through sheer coincidence, stumbles upon the underwater city of Rapture. As soon as he sets foot in the city that since fell to ruin, he's contacted by Atlas on a radio, who asks Jack to help rescue his family and eliminate Rapture's sinister patriarch, Andrew Ryan. From here, Atlas is our guiding voice throughout this subterranean dystopia. He's the one who explains how plasmids and Adam work, as well as telling us where to go and what to do next. When we finally make it to Ryan's offices, though, we're greeted by a shocking reveal. Audio logs explain that Jack was a product of an experimentation in which he was programmed to obey any command that followed the phrase, "Would you kindly?" clearly, the words Atlas has been politely directing us with throughout the entire game. Moreover, in a second game-changing twist, Atlas was none other than Ryan's rival, Frank Fontaine. Not only does this twist reframe everything we thought we knew about Ryan's authoritarian rule over Rapture, but this plot point also functions as a meta-commentary on player agency. Like Jack, we too blindly just followed Fontaine's commands. And number 1, Silent Hill 2, What James Did. If M. Night Shyamalan has taught us anything, it's that great psychological horrors are made all the better with a tantalizing twist. And one of the most well-known and effective examples of these twists within a video game came towards the end of iconic survival horror Silent Hill 2. Playing as everyman James Sunderland, this unsettling horror sees him travel to the titular town after receiving a letter from his wife asking him to meet them there at a special place. What's especially strange about this, though, is that Mary has been dead for 3 years. As he searches for his wife in the fog-covered town, James encounters monstrous figures and a handful of troubled characters, one of which who eerily looks like his wife. Describing the ensuing events as strange would be, well, an understatement, but things become even wilder and weirder when James eventually discovers a video of him and his wife. Not only does this video confirm that Mary has definitely been deceased all along, but it also reveals that it was James who killed her after being unable to see her suffer with an illness. Everything that James had gone through in this hellish purgatory has been a symbolic, self-inflicted punishment for his own guilt. What a twist.
When games seem like they're not going to take a very long time to get through, and then you realize they absolutely are going to take a really long time to get through, there's 2 ways you could go about it. You might be the annoyed type of gamer or the excited type of gamer, depending on whether you like bang for your buck, or if you're a I only had an hour to play this game, how on earth am I going to get through it sort of person. Whether you didn't know just how big the map was, the gameplay format took a hard left, or things got a little funky with time, which happens way more than you'd expect in video games, these 10 titles all pulled you along for the ride and then some. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are the 10 best "the game is bigger than you think" moments. Number 10, Nier Automata. One of the most popular instances of a moment where you realize the game is so much bigger than you thought it was going to be is in Nier Automata, which is right up there with Castlevania Symphony of the Night in letting you think you finished the entire game and then hitting you with, don't worry, there's so much more game to go. Nier Automata requires you to play through its story multiple times if you want to experience the whole thing, and every ending it has to throw at you, which, let's be clear, is 26. 26 endings. Even those prepped for multiple endings because they have experience with Nier or other branching video games wouldn't have expected Automata to go this far, but that's part of the magic of the game. It's not until your second playthrough that you'll experience things as a totally different character, and then not until your third where you'll drop into yet another pair of android shoes and get another big piece of the story. Even if you were anticipating this was a game that was going to take you some time given the replay value and just the sheer scope of its open world, no one could have expected just this much from the story that keeps on giving. If Nier Automata didn't hit you at this moment, the game would miss out on a huge part of its impact and the way everything coalesces between its plotlines and characters to tell you an extraordinarily unique story that you got to experience for yourself. Number 9, The Stanley Parable. From the outset, the Stanley Parable seems bizarre, albeit fairly straightforward. You play as the guy Stanley, who is an office worker, and the only really weird thing that stands out here is that your life is, for some reason, being narrated. Not just narrated though, instructed. When you kick into the game, the narrator lays out your next steps for you, the implication being that you as the player can just follow along with what you're being slated to do. Of course, you can also not do that. When the narrator says Stanley turns left, you can turn right. You naturally expect that things will develop beyond this point, but few would predict the possibilities in this game would extend to commentary on existentialism, philosophy, the nature of happiness, free will, and duty. There are also an enormous amount of endings that run the gamut between having to press a button over and over again so a cardboard cutout of a baby doesn't crawl into a fire, that then turns into stopping a puppy from crawling into the fire, and then there's endings that get really serious and deep and start talking about the nature of the human condition. Given there are so many possibilities for where the game can ultimately go and how and when you choose to go there, your personal moment for when you realize this game is way bigger than you expected will be just that. Personal. But when it does hit you, it's a very exciting realization. Number 8, Elden Ring. Now this is one of those entries that's firmly in if you know territory, and if you don't, boy are you in for a treat. From Software making a game that's rich in lore, expansive in scope, and riddled with rewarding exploration and surprises to stumble on isn't news. Even so, the sheer size, visual spectacle, and thousands of critters to meet, almost all of whom are trying to kill you, is something to balk at. Much like the Stanley Parable, the Lands Between lets you loose to go anywhere you want, whenever you want. So your "oh my god, this game is enormous" moment will vary from someone else's. Despite having a vague idea of what the map looks like, because you can see a version of it at the very beginning of the game, you're not at all prepared for just how big this thing actually is. And we aren't talking an underground lair here or a multi-floor castle there. We mean entire swaths of land and sprawling locations that don't even appear on the original map. Not only can you stumble upon these areas, there are teleportation chests which, upon your interaction with them, will spirit you away to a location you probably never even knew existed. Elden Ring is a game that well and truly intends to swallow you up, and with a map this stacked with encounters and things to find, it's totally prepped to do that. Number 7. Dragon Quest XI-S, Echoes of an Elusive Age. The JRPG franchise Dragon Quest is an institution that has been running for decades since 1986, and over all that time, it's established a few staple features. There's your hero's journey at the center of it all, saving the world from whatever big bad is putting it in peril, a party that engages in turn-based combat, certain monsters that reappear many times throughout the series, and recurrent surprise encounters. A lot of Dragon Age games are also known for being quite a bit bigger than they first appear. In more than one of the titles, including Dragon Quest XI, the reason for this is because Square Enix incorporated a time travel mechanic. Said mechanic practically doubles the runtime of the game Castlevania style. This is not so much a burden though as it is an opportunity. In the same vein as Nier Automata, you get to learn more about what's actually going on behind the scenes narrative-wise and who the real big bads of the story are. You'll have another chance to save old friends, vanquish old adversaries, and have epic new encounters. Number 6. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. There are many games that don't show their full map hand at the very beginning of the game, and The Witcher 3 is one of them. While this is a blessing in this case because, more Witcher 3 is never a bad thing, boy is there a lot to do. Of course, making your way out of the original point of embarkment, White Orchard, is certainly a reveal that shows you more of the game map, as is your journey through Velen and eventually to the main city of Novigrad. Nothing compares to rocking up in Skellige. Since this moment takes place dozens of hours into your playthrough, since every location is absolutely flooded with quest objectives to cross off, villages to explore, and secrets to uncover, nothing can quite prepare you for this enormous group of islands. It is as exciting a prospect as it is daunting if you're a completionist like me, and not just because there are literally 58 smuggler's caches to pick up from various points in the water. It's also because Geralt cannot fly and is not a mermaid, and there's so many of these bloody caches and islands you're gonna spend a lot of time on the water, in a tiny little boat, unless sirens manage to take out your tiny little boat. Then it will become very apparent very quickly that Geralt does not swim particularly well or particularly fast, and you'll find that out in the full 7 minutes it takes you to get to the closest landmass. At least the closest landmass he can climb onto, because he's not much of a climber either. Number 5. Divinity Original Sin 2. Another game that will inundate you with content before it even shows you just how much there is to do is Divinity Original Sin 2, Larian's 2017 RPG masterpiece, not to be confused with their 2023 RPG masterpiece. This one kicks off in Fort Joy. Okay, technically this game kicks off in a ship, but I don't think anyone actually thought the whole game was going to take place on a ship. No game developer would make their entire game take place on a ship. That would be bizarre. Except for Return of the Obra Dinn, which is a really good game. Anyway, I feel like we're getting off track. Let's go back. Once you get off that ship, you'll wash up on the shores of Fort Joy, and yes, Larian really do love kicking their games off with you on a beach. To be clear, Fort Joy is no small location. It has hundreds of things to explore and dozens of quests to complete, not to mention 16 discrete areas for you to check out. Naturally though, all of this is leading to your escape, which comes after another few dozen hours, whereupon you unravel a lot more of the epic fantasy story and your role within it, as you rock up to the sprawling Reaper's Coast. If for some reason the size of the game didn't have you rocking back in your chair and inhaling sharply at that point, then your subsequent journey to the almost equally huge, encounter-riddled and delightfully inundating location, the Nameless Isle, ought to do it. By the time you hit the game's last enormous location, the city of Arx, which you're called to for narrative reasons that I won't spoil, you're probably no longer surprised at just how darn big this thing is. But somewhere between Fort Joy and Arx, it probably hits you, so while your mileage will vary, the size of this game is pretty indisputable. Number 4, Fire Emblem Three Houses. The Fire Emblem series has been running since 1990, and it's pretty universally agreed that 2019's Three Houses is one of the best entries in the bunch. The tactical role-playing game has you take on the role of Byleth, a mercenary turned teacher, and among your first choices in the game is which of the school's houses you would like to teach. The Golden Deer, the Blue Lions, or the Black Eagles, which is obviously the coolest. Each choice grants you a separate group of students who all have different personalities, backgrounds, goals, and abilities, though over the course of the game you're able to recruit new students from other houses into yours. As a result, it appears your choice at the beginning doesn't matter all that much. Some way through the game, though, you hit a 5-year time jump, and what was just kind of chill schooling and low-key battles turns into an all-out political war where lives hang in the balance. All of a sudden, your mileage varies wildly depending on which school you chose at the start of the game, and one of them even diverges further into 2 significantly different paths depending on your choices. Your relationships determine who may perish or be saved and who might ally with you, not to mention who your main antagonist will be as the game wears on. Number 3, Inscription. Now, there isn't a lot about Inscription that hasn't already been said, and what has been said, most of which was probably by me, if it's been me in these videos trying to get you to play it, shouldn't be expanded on because you want to play the game for yourself, but let me explain it here anyway. If you're not averse to deck-building digital card games, this one will be right up your alley, since that's the gameplay at the core of this experience. Sort of. Mostly. Technically, you will spend the vast percentage of your time in Inscription engaging in card battles, but where those take place, in what format, against what manner of adversary, and to what end, changes drastically within each act of the game. Ultimately, though, it's the moment between Act 1 ending and Act 2 beginning that will have you questioning everything, and hit with the realization that, narratively, mechanically, and in terms of scope, things go far deeper than they first appeared. Developer Daniel Mullins has crafted something really special in this 2021 roguelike that somehow slots into and defies all these different genres at the same time. Number 2, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Being that Final Fantasy Remake arrived 23 years after the original first debuted, it's understandable that a lot of things were going to be different. But it wasn't until players got their hands on the game that they learned exactly what had changed, particularly all the ways in which it doesn't simply remake, but completely reimagines the original RPG. Plenty of gamers with strong nostalgia for the classic version will have been floored by the expansion of the game's narrative, its world map, deeper dives into fan-favorite characters, boss battles, and combat evolution. Ultimately, though, I think if we could slate one moment for this game is a hell of a lot bigger than I thought, it's probably the very end where you realize the game actually only covers Midgar, and there's so much more of Final Fantasy VII to come. Number 1, Might and Magic 8: Day of the Destroyer. Another classic old RPG series that kicked off in the late 80s was Might and Magic. You're given a small set of islands to explore first before romping through an underground temple and making your way to the primary entry point that will open up the rest of the game world, which is enormous, like really enormous. You can travel by way of boat, stable, or most surprisingly and entertainingly, walking all the way to the edge of your current location until you get a prompt that may ask you if you want to consume some rations to just keep on walking to the next region. It's only upon doing one of these things, or more than one of them, that you'll find out the full map is actually 2 sets of islands and 7 interconnected land masses that all consist of different cities, biomes, and plenty of things to do. It's all by the book when you're 2 or 3 locations in and feeling like you have your head around it, but once you keep checking back to the docks and stables, or like I said, bumping into the edge of the map, and being prompted to visit even more regions you've never heard of, you'll understand the true size of the continent of Jadam.
To keep the industry fresh, modern video game developers are always looking for ways to make titles more subversive. The story is set up to go in one direction, nobody's ready when things venture down a different path. These aren't necessarily the weirdest, but certainly the most unexpected cases, and spoiler warning is therefore in full effect, because I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here are the 10 biggest WTF moments in recent video games. Number 10, Zagreus wins, dies anyway. Hades. Hades opens with demigod Zagreus Zagreus attempting to leave his father's domain, hoping to find his mother Persephone in Greece. Since Zag literally lives in the bowels of hell, his quest is easier said than done. To escape Hades' gargantuan maze, the prince of the underworld has to contend with countless demons and booby traps, and after Zagreus reaches the gates to the mortal realm, he'll have to duke it out with the god of the dead himself. Just to make things more unfair, Zag goes back to the start every time he bites the dust. Because of this roguelike title's ghastly difficulty curve, Zagreus will perish umpteen times, battle thousands of enemies, and traverse through hundreds of chapters before finally triumphing over his dastardly dad. As a result, it's deeply satisfying when our plucky protagonist reaches the surface and locates Persephone. But to Zagreus' horror, he learns that he cannot survive in the human world. Mere moments after meeting his dear mother, Hades' rebellious son is cast back home. Somehow it gets worse. For Zagreus to truly reunite with his mother, he'll need to navigate through the labyrinthine prison all over again and defeat Hades 6 more times. It goes without saying that there wasn't a single person who wasn't sideswiped by this revelation. Just before meeting Persephone, players were under the impression they were moments away from victory. In reality, they had only completed 15% of the main campaign. Number 9, Square Enix goes full Game of Thrones, Final Fantasy XVI. The latest installment in Square Enix's RPG saga centers around the firstborn son of Rosaria's ruling family, Clive Rossfield. Clive is tasked with protecting his younger brother Joshua, the future king and current wielder of the summoning icon Phoenix. As Joshua's duke prepares to have the boy return safely to the capital, he's intercepted by a rival faction. And by intercepted, I mean the soldiers slaughter the duke's poor chocobo, soaking the cobblestones below in the feathery creature's blood. The duke is then impaled, spraying his innards across Joshua's traumatized face. Even though this sequence is followed by an epic battle between iconic icons, Phoenix and Ifrit, this gory encounter stands out more. Final Fantasy rarely shies away from violence, but the beloved series has never showcased bloodshed on this scale. Did we really have to see a poor chocobo get butchered? It was risky to have the story open so barbarously, but it instantly demonstrated that Final Fantasy XVI was going to be much darker than its predecessors. Number 8, the new content, the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. It's no surprise the Stanley Parable has plenty of WTF moments, considering this black comedy-drenched mindbender deals with existentialism, predestination, and Hobson's choice. So when Galactic Cafe announced this indie hit will receive a bonus crammed remaster, fans expected the Ultra Deluxe version to take the meta humour and macabre zaniness to further extremes. After playing through Ultra Deluxe several times, the narrator announces that Stanley has unlocked additional material and directs him to an open door unsubtly labelled new content. Our silent protagonist is brought to a room where he's given the ability to jump, and that's it. Furious by this underwhelming reward, the narrator does all he can to make it up to Stanley. After resetting the game, the narrator brings him to the new content room where Stanley is shown potential ideas for the sequel, including a bottomless hole that's not bottomless, a game show, puppies, and most noticeably a reassurance bucket. Believing these additions aren't substantial, the narrator scraps everything, allowing the titular character to play the Stanley Parable 2, and then the Stanley Parable 3, and then 4, and you get the idea. Number 7, Velvet Chair Girl, No More Heroes 3. Katana-wielding otaku Travis Touchdown returns in No More Heroes 3 to save the world from an impending alien invasion led by the nefarious FU. Although the series is known for its unconventional style, this sequel's subversive gameplay is beyond anything fans have seen before. This is more apparent while facing the bosses, since Travis has no idea whether he's going to take part in a mono-in-mono scrap, a turn-based fight, or a Smash Brothers themed brawl. However, no aspect of the game goes as balls-to-the-wall nutty as the boss Velvet Chair Girl. As Travis and his talking cat enter Velvet's disco-draped arena, players will be trying to guess what form the battle would take. A dance-off? A rap battle? No, this duel is far more childish. After Velvet arrives on her throne alongside her eclectic entourage, she challenges Travis to the ancient ritual of musical chairs. Somehow it gets sillier each time Travis makes it through the next round of this so-called fight. Velvet's pet bioweapon Oma kills one of her minions while screaming, "Adrian!" in the same vein as Rocky Balboa for some reason. Number 6, round 2 with Melania, Elden Ring. Almost immediately after Elden Ring launched, Melania was crowned as the latest, hardest boss ever. Although mantles like this are tossed around frivolously, especially when discussing Souls-like games, it's difficult to think of a single enemy as notorious as the silver-armed Valkyrie. Even if our hero, the Tarnished, has every upgrade at his disposal and is armed to the teeth, vanquishing Melania is a monumental task due to her swift speed and merciless savagery. After dying dozens of times, players should breathe a sigh of relief when the one-handed Shardbearer meets her end, knowing they just defeated the most daunting foe in the game. Unfortunately, Unfortunately, Melania isn't done. Just as the Tarnished is about to walk away, the wicked wench wraps herself in a cocoon, re-emerging as the self-proclaimed goddess of rot. Anyone who thought the first phase was hard will be horrified to learn that it was merely the warm-up. Melania's second phase makes basically everything else in the game combined feel like child's play. Not only is Melania 2.0 astronomically fast and strong, her attacks aren't telegraphed, making it nearly impossible to dodge anything she throws at you. Worst of all, she can restore nearly all of her health with little notice, effectively resetting the battle over and over. Although everyone was expecting a challenge, not even From Software purists were ready for this onslaught. Number 5, Samus Aran becomes a Metroid Dread. Over the last 37 years, Samus Aran has been tasked with eliminating the energy-absorbing Metroids from the galaxy. Although she seemingly accomplished her mission, the antagonist of Metroid Dread, Ravenbeak, points out there is still one Metroid left, Samus herself. Because she used a Metroid's power to defeat the Mother Brain during the events of Super Metroid, our Phyllis heroine unknowingly absorbed the parasite's DNA. Knowing the power that lies within Samus, Ravenbeak intends to create a clone army of Metroids, allowing him to conquer the cosmos. Despite her best efforts, Samus finds herself unable to best Ravenbeak in battle. Just as the corrupted Chozo is about to finish her, Samus's Metroid genes activate, endowing the bounty hunter with enough strength to destroy her rival. What makes this scene so shocking is watching Samus going absolutely berserk after awakening her full power. Because she's always been depicted as a calm and collected warrior, it's surreal to see Samus screaming at the top of her lungs as she obliterates her enemy. Even though Samus has had a ton of badass moments over the years, this scene sits at the very top. Number 4, it's not over 12 minutes. In 12 minutes, a husband arrives home to learn his wife is pregnant. Soon after, a hostile intruder breaks in and strangles the husband to death. Unfortunately, this is only the beginning of the husband's problems, since this death creates a time loop, turning the clock back 12 minutes. If the husband leaves the apartment, dies, or time runs out, the loop restarts. Only by performing a string of specific actions can the husband escape from his unique predicament. Because no clear goal is given, it goes without saying that this point-and-click adventure requires a hefty amount of trial and error. For several hours, players will try to befriend, overpower, or kill the attacker, only to be met with the same result time and time again. But once enough clues are put together, the husband manages to talk down the invader, compelling him to admit his wrongdoing. While watching the trio come to a peaceful understanding, players should be chuffed knowing the situation has been solved, which is why it's bewildering when the time loop starts again. In that moment, players realise there was another crucial detail they completely missed. This was a genius rug pull, since players were 100% certain it was all said and done. Number 3, Game Over Fake Out, God of War Ragnarok. In the sequel to the 2018 God of War reboot, Kratos and his son Atreus find themselves at war with the Norse pantheon once more. As they travel across the 9 realms, the pair encounter many arduous adversaries, including vicious Valkyries, the merciless Sigrun, and Odin the Allfather. However, the foe that's sure to leave everyone quaking in their boots is the next in line for Asgard's throne, Thor. Don't let his beer belly and dishevelled appearance deceive you. During the first face-off, the hammer-wielding destroyer reminds Kratos why he's the one true prince of Asgard. Unable to compete with Thor's vastly superior strength, the Ghost of Sparta is sure to meet his end shortly after the bout begins as part of an unbeatable QuickTime event. As the loading screen appears, the player expects the game to return them to their last checkpoint. But out of nowhere, the mighty God of Thunder interrupts the game over screen by electrocuting Kratos back to life. And why does the boorish deity do this? So that he can kill Kratos all over again, of course. Even though the final battle with Thor is far more epic, nothing in God of War Ragnarok has the same effect as this masterful fake out. Number 2, all the jump scares at Dead of Night. At Dead of Night centres around a student called Maya who's trapped in a hotel with a lunatic called Jimmy. While making her way around the building, Maya's mission is constantly interrupted by a deluge of jump scares. These bone-chilling moments are terrifying because the player never knows what's going to lunge at them next. While walking down the stairs, the lights can flicker, causing a bloody corpse to momentarily appear on the steps. At any given moment, Jimmy can pop out and lop off our heroine's head. As Maya enters a new room, she might suddenly encounter a shrieking girl holding a burning teddy bear. Even though Five Nights at Freddy's set the precipice for jump scare horror games, fans quickly knew what to expect. Gamers aren't sure when the boo moment will happen, but they know it'll always involve a creepy animatronic. But at Dead of Night is far more nerve-wracking since players haven't an inkling what's going to jump out. And since the game primarily uses FMV footage, it makes the whole experience more realistic and therefore more spine-tingling. No matter how many times gamers encounter a ghost or the deranged Jimmy, it's just as petrifying as the first time it happened. Number 1, Zelda's plan involves what? The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. The Legend of Zelda is renowned for its incredible fighting mechanics, elaborate puzzles, and focus on exploration. However, it also has a reputation for being strange. After experiencing the Windmill Man paradox, the nightmare-inducing Great Fairies, the Killer Cuckoos, the human-faced Ukus, and Tingle, fans should have gotten used to all of the absurdity. And yet, every installment leaves gamers crying out, what the hell was that, at some point. Unsurprisingly, Tears of the Kingdom is no different. In the prologue, Ganondorf destroys the Master Sword before casting Princess Zelda into the distant past. Believing Link cannot defeat the Demon King without the sword, Zelda formulates a plan to fix the enchanted blade and return it to the hero of time. So how does she do this? Well, she eats a magical stone that transforms her into an immortal dragon. Okay, didn't see that one coming. Knowing that the Master Sword will heal over time, she embeds it into her draconified skull, as you do, and then flies around for millennia until Link finds her and retrieves his sacred weapon. Although there are dozens of bizarre moments in the franchise, it's difficult to think of anything more gobsmacking than Princess Zelda's mind-boggling plan.
You know what? It is never nice to start a project or job and realise the moment that you begin that it's going to be an uphill slog to make any progress. Well, unfortunately for you, my friend, video games themselves aren't above completely screwing the player over at any given opportunity. So let's take a look at them today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 precise video game moments you knew you were utterly screwed. Number 8. Stealing from the shopkeeper. Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. So I don't know if this even needs to be said, but stealing, unless under dire circumstances, is pretty much universally agreed to be wrong. Yet, as video games are basically a free fall into the abyss of but what if, a lot of titles let you hoover up heirlooms and personal possessions like mad, and the hero of time Link is no exception to this, routinely entering houses and smashing belongings for the few rupees that are hidden within like he's an overzealous taxman working for the Sheriff of Bloody Nottingham. Therefore, you'd think that his pockets would be swollen enough that he wouldn't need to resort to stealing larger, more valuable items, right? Well, in Link's Awakening, the player is given the option to carry out one item from the shops that are dotted around the world and make off with the prize free of charge. Now, at first this might appear to be a glitch, but as soon as the player emerges from the shop, a barrage of text reminds the players of their thieving ways, and it is pretty humiliating. At that moment, players knew that they'd screwed up. And making matters worse, if that pang of conscience provokes the pickpocket in you to repent, well, you're met with a lightning-based death as the shopkeeper then fries you like a microwave. Brutal. Number 7. Playing the game on easy mode. Spec Ops Stealth Patrol. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, after playing a few difficult games, oh boy, I sure don't fancy any of this nonsense happening to me, so you know what, I'm going to play things safe and play some games on easy mode. And to you, my friend, I salute you, because difficulty should not dictate what you get out of a video game experience. There's no shame in playing a game on a difficulty that suits a more relaxed playstyle, and as long as you're having fun, who the hell cares whether you're on insane ultra hard mode or not? Well, before you commit to the more travelled road, maybe you should just check what game you're playing first, as some, believe it or not, absolutely screw you over by playing on easy. Take, for example, Spec Ops Stealth Patrol, which, thanks to an issue with the game's code, shipped with a pretty horrible bug that caused the hardest and easiest difficulties to be switched. This meant that you were utterly, totally boned if you chose private, because the title would totally kick you in yours from the off. Number 6. Attacking Morgan Freeman. South Park: The Fractured But Whole. I mean, just look at the title of this entry for a moment and ask yourself, is this ever going to be a good idea? Well, if there's ever a game willing to let you be an utter arse before spanking you on yours, it's South Park: The Fractured But Whole, as this game is pretty much a checklist of insane moments and self-aware nods. Gifting the player the ability to hit any NPC they come across was always going to be something that the fan base was going to spam to death, and thanks to townsfolk usually just spouting off a funny one-liner, you can see how people ended up instigating the hardest boss fight in the game by accident. You see, if you head to Freeman's Tacos and start punching the man who literally played God, he'll finally have enough after 3 strikes and take your butt to school and then send you detention for good measure. The moment the battle begins, unprepared players were utterly screwed as Freeman attacks without remorse and so quickly that you'll likely be completely wiped within moments. Ouch. Number 5. Being invaded by a naked player. Dark Souls. Now, being invaded in the Dark Souls games is never a fun experience. The sheer escalation in tension whenever another player rudely interrupts the flow of your game is enough to make your veins burst and your heart give out, as not only now do you have to dodge the utter horrors of the regular game, but now also contend with the threat of a red menace diving out of nowhere and taking your lunch money. However, there's actually one moment above this that screams you are totally and utterly boned, and that is when the invading player is completely naked. Now, you might raise an eyebrow at this, but bear with me, because in this franchise, naked runs are usually only undertaken by those that have mastered their respective games. This low armor build allows them to roll at rapid speeds even when wielding the biggest weapons, and that combination of agility, aggression, and oh my god, my spine is enough to make most players peace out of the battle immediately. You are in for a world of pain whenever a Rudy Nudie invades your world, so take my advice and run. Run. Number 4. Facing the Red Dragon. Dungeons & Dragons Tower of Doom. Now, to be clear, there are actually so many times the player should realise that they are screwed when coming up against the mighty Red Dragon in the equally beefy Dungeons & Dragons Tower of Doom. So much so that you'd actually have to be pretty boneheaded not to see that you're basically making out with Death's wife in front of him. For a start, the game warns you multiple times when choosing to take on this monolithic boss battle, asking again and again if you realise what you're actually getting into. Then, when the fight starts, the dragon immediately kicks out a full-screen attack which might well kill you outright there and then. However, if this wasn't enough to set the alarm bell labelled "Oh Christ, I've made a terrible mistake" going off in your head, then maybe attacking the beast only to see its health bar not move in the slightest might see the penny finally drop. You see, the Red Dragon's health bar is actually so large that it can't fit on screen properly, and it will be a fair old while before you see any dent in it at all, meaning that you're in such a prolonged state of being screwed, you might as well get your post forwarded there. Number 3. Realising the Lone Shadow Valhand is anything but. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Now, as before mentioned, From Software titles are pretty much the be-all and end-all of your hopes and bloody dreams, routinely smashing your body and indeed pride to pieces with cruel tricks and a ton of PvP agony. Now, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, not wanting to be left out of the action, presented multiple moments where unsuspecting players could be turned into kebab meat, but nothing was as big a gotcha moment as when Wolf comes up against Lone Shadow Valhand in Ashina Castle. This mini-boss fight begins with the player approaching Valhand from behind as he prays at an altar, and you might have actually put down the controller to rub your hands with glee at this setup, an unsuspecting figure in a game where a single backstab can take off a full bar of health, don't mind if I do. Yet as the player approaches this supposedly lone figure, they might suddenly find their own health bar under assault, as the bastard isn't actually alone at all. Standing in the corner is another less than friendly soul who will play the same trick on you that you were just trying to enact, and as the blade strikes home, totaling your HP, you will definitely know that you've not just been screwed, but you're being laughed at as well. Number 2. When Twitch controls your fate. Vermintide 2. Now, trust is such an important thing in life, isn't it? Letting go of the reins of your life and passing them to somebody else is a daunting prospect, but trusting somebody else can result in a peace of spirit and mind that simply cannot be achieved by other means for some people. It's also a delicate thing, easily broken and difficult to repair. Therefore, you should choose carefully when it comes to the matter of who to trust. Also, side note, never put your trust in Twitch stream audiences, because Jesus Christ will they ever screw you over. For a perfect example of this, try playing Vermintide 2 with the Twitch integration mode switched on, because this turns an already horrendously difficult experience into an absolute nightmare. Here, the audience gets to vote on which beasts drop in your path on top of the existing hordes, and some of the options are just plain brutal. Fancy taking on a bile troll while your party is already dealing with a rat ogre? No? Well, tough. Even worse is that these spawns can happen at any time, meaning that you might just have finished dealing with one onslaught before the next one begins, and when that horn sounds, you know that you are totally and utterly screwed. And number 1, making the jump. Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection. The recently released Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection has been an absolute blast from the past in all the right ways. It's beautiful to look at, fun to play, and absolutely rock hard when it comes to its difficulty. However, it's also one of the cheekiest whippets out there, displaying its love for killing the player at every given opportunity. And there was one instance right out of the gate which taught players one thing and one thing clearly: this game is going to screw with you. I'm speaking, of course, about the accursed log that appears midway through the opening zombie graveyard level. Here you have to make a jump over a body of water, land on a log, and then be carried over to a checkpoint that is waiting on the other side for you. However, there's just one problem. Actually, there are many problems, namely that as you're trying to make this jump, you're being hunted by the red devil known as Firebrand, sliding down a slope towards the jump, and possibly having a magician shoot a spell at you that will turn you into a frog all at once. Oh, and by the way, the log occasionally doesn't come close enough to you to make the jump, which can result in a single moment where you may indeed be screwed over by several things at once. Cheers.
Gaming is an entertainment medium that comes in many shapes and sizes. If you're the kind of person who loves to delve deep into a challenging long-term title, there's plenty to grab. On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you just want to unwind with a casual game, that's so easy nowadays you can do it on your phone. But there's another specific set of gamers who opt for something different, something much darker, and that's scaring the absolute ever-loving shit out of themselves. But even within the hardcore circles of horror lovers, some games cross the boundary and become so damn scary that they're hard to get through. Of course, the list ahead does have spoilers, so beware. I'm Just from What Culture, and here are 10 exact moments you tapped out of horror games. Number 10. The Mimic, the Mortuary Assistant. The 2022 indie hit, The Mortuary Assistant, is a game so terrifying you'll never want to step into a mortuary in your life. Not that probably many of you wanted to anyway. This game masterfully scares you by constantly placing you around dead bodies and forcing you to undergo tedious procedures, always wondering if something scary will pop out at you. Of course, this tension is backed up by the big scares that do happen, and by God, this one's a doozy. The Mimic, also known as the White Figure, is an entity that can be encountered in the game. Thanks to the game's procedural generation, you never know when you might stumble across it. The first time you spot this entity is enough to give you a heart attack. You'll simply be going about your business, working on embalming corpses, when you see something out of the corner of your eye. When you look towards it, you'll see this creature glaring at you, smiling, before quickly slinking off with uncanny, unnatural movements. If you're not used to the game yet and you see this, then no one would judge you for saying, yeah, you know what, this is not for me. Number 9. When you see it, don't move. Faith the Unholy Trinity. Many people look at Faith the Unholy Trinity and think, who would get scared by an 8-bit game? Then they give it a go and realize they're not immune to its spooky tricks. This unique horror trilogy is filled to the brim with clever scares. While there's still plenty to be freaked out by, this encounter with the Peekaboo Demon really sells what makes Faith so frightening. The moment comes in Chapter 2 when the protagonist John investigates the Candy Tunnel. Inside, you'll find a room with 4 pillars that can be pieced together to read, "When you see it, don't move." Ooh, now what could that mean? The ominous warning is soon put into practice, as in the next room, a terrifying demon approaches you and you must stay still to survive it. The horrible creature walks towards you looking like something from a Guillermo del Toro movie. It's utterly spine-chilling. You can also choose not to heed the warnings given to you and try to run away, but the results won't be pretty. Number 8. Nekun Spots You, Bramble the Mountain King. Bramble the Mountain King is one of those gems of a game that seems sweet and whimsical at first, but becomes so scary that it hits you like a speeding truck. Yeah, this title is beautiful, wholesome, and uplifting, but it's also a downright nightmare, and this moment exemplifies that. By the time you stumble across Nekun's Pond, a location in the game, you'll already have had trouble dealing with monstrous trolls. But they pale in comparison to this violin-playing water spirit who lures you in with his music and then stalks you in the water. The specific moment in question is this antagonist's introduction. This occurs when you follow the sound of the strange violin and land on a lily pad. You spot the creature in the background and he notices you, putting his instrument down and sliding into the water, completely out of sight. Seeing this terrifying villain in the distance is genius, as he's far enough away that you don't get a good look at him, yet you can still tell how scary he is. You're instantly put on edge as he disappears because you know he's coming for you. Never before will you have wanted to get out of a picturesque pond so badly. Number 7. The mannequin dolls. Devotion. Most people can agree that certain things are just monstrously creepy, no matter what. Spiders? Check. Clowns? Check. Emotionless dolls? Oh boy, do we give them a check. When it comes to implementing creepy mannequin-style dolls into gameplay, you'd be hard-pressed to find anything better than this segment in Red Candle Games' Devotion. Devotion puts you in the shoes of a troubled man wandering around his family home, with the story being slowly unveiled through exploration and puzzle solving. In one section of the game, you're greeted by a room full of uncanny dolls, and you just know they're gonna move. As you look about the place, you'll slowly notice that these abominations have a habit of moving while you're not looking. This leads to constant terror as you have to walk around them, always fearing that they might just get you while you're not looking. It is a masterclass in tension. This kind of scare is hardly original, we're looking at you, Doctor Who, but it's done so well in this brilliant game. Number 6. Your first glimpse of the monster, Iron Lung. Are fish scary? Well, some people think so, looking at you, H.P. Lovecraft, but most gamers can agree that outside of Subnautica, you don't have to worry about the creatures you find in the water. However, what about fish that swim in oceans of blood? Alright, that'll do it. Iron Lung is a phenomenal yet simple horror game that combines claustrophobia and thalassophobia into one neat package. You play as a convict who explores an ocean of blood on a distant moon, all inside a rusty and decaying submarine. Your only ability to glimpse outside the submersible is through an archaic camera, and it's through that mechanism that you realize you're not alone in these waters. Or bloods. There comes a moment when you capture the image of an eye glaring right into the camera. Knowing something this big, threatening, and dangerous is out there is enough to make most people call it quits on the game. In a weird turn of events, the legendary YouTuber Markiplier is working on a live-action movie adaptation of the short game. So you'll soon get to see this freaky moment in another medium. Hooray! Number 5. Witnessing the groom's surgery. Outlast Whistleblower. The Outlast games are notorious at this point, and one of the biggest selling points of the franchise is its impressive roster of sinister villains. Many of the antagonists get your blood pumping, but none do it quite like the groom from the Whistleblower DLC. Eddie Gluskin is a lovely guy looking to find a gorgeous bride and fall in love. Of course, he's also a batshit wild murderer who wants to cut off your family jewels and make you his bride. Love is in the air, everyone. Every encounter with this horrific beast is freaky enough, but one moment stands above the rest. In one segment, you'll find yourself inside a locker within Eddie's workshop, where you bear witness to a gruesome surgery. You're forced to watch a person having their manhood forcibly removed. That's already horrible enough, but it becomes worse once you realize that your character is headed towards the same fate. Ouch. This moment is nowhere near as romantic as the villain thinks it is, and many people will be so disturbed they put down the game for good. Number 4. The Arrival of Laura, the Evil Within. First impressions are vital, and that goes double for villains. If you really want players to be afraid of an antagonist, you've got to give them a reason to be. That's the MO for the Evil Within, as this character's debut will make you scream so hard you lose your voice. At the tail end of Chapter 4 in the first Evil Within game, you find yourself in a small morgue, with a corpse lying in a puddle of blood. While that's a horrid sight, you still feel safe in the room, as the only way in and out is through the door you entered. But no! Laura is about to make a gnarly entrance. This horrendous monster bursts out of the dead body and lets out a blood-curdling scream. She's a spider-like creature with a human face, and she's coming for you. You barely have time to figure out what's going on as you start sprinting away, only to find a locked door and this monster still coming straight for you. This might have been the arrival of the antagonist, but it was the departure of many players. Number 3. The Falling Woman, Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly. What game has the scariest ghosts? This is a question some might ask, and barring an entry coming later, plenty of gamers would answer with an emphatic Fatal Frame. This beloved series has plenty of entities that will give you nightmares, but the seminal Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly has arguably the freakiest of them all. You'll struggle to survive your encounter with the Falling Woman if you're not brave enough. The Falling Woman first appears when you're walking down a flight of stairs. A cutscene shows her glaring at you as she plummets headfirst down to the floor. The genius of this moment is that you're now fully aware of what awaits at the bottom of those steps, yet the only way to progress is to go say hello. That dread of of heading down to her is bad enough, but it gets worse as you have to capture her with your camera. Her twisted form chases you across the room and leaves you in fits of fear. So that's a brilliant setup and payoff, but perhaps so brilliant it scares too many players away. Number 2. House Beneviento, Resident Evil Village. Resident Evil is the gaming gift that keeps on giving, if your idea of a gift is soiled trousers. There are countless terrifying moments within the games, but there's no debate that Resi 8 produced one of the absolute scariest with the dreaded House Beneviento. This house, which is the domain of the Second Lord Donna, starts out eerie and then turns into a pure nightmare. After some exploration, you'll have all the tools you've used to survive the game so far, i.e. your weapons, ammo, and equipment, stripped from you. So before anything starts, you already feel powerless. Things go from bad to worse after some time exploring the environment, as you hear a cry while walking down a hallway. Then you see the baby. Babies tend to be cute, but this horrible fetus monster is anything but. Its babbling noises, horrifying design, and looming presence as you escape from it are enough to make you drop the controller from fright. Running away from it is spine-chilling as you can always feel it right behind you. Your encounter with the baby ends with you desperately waiting for an elevator as the thing comes up behind you. It's a masterclass in horror gaming, and Capcom deserves heaps of praise for it. Number 1. Meeting Lisa in the hallway, PT. At this point, it's hardly a shock to hear someone call PT one of the scariest games ever made. It's the perfect horror gaming experience, and who do you have to thank for that? Besides Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro, of course, it's Lisa. This bone-chilling entity is a ghost murdered by her husband, so she skulks around the halls of the ever-repeating apartment where the game is set. You can spot Lisa multiple times in the game, including when she glares at you from the balcony or slams the bathroom door closed after you peer into it. But nothing compares to the first time you see her in the space you occupy, now knowing she's here for you. Walking around the corner to see this gaunt figure in the hallway fills players with a primal fear that's hard to combat. She's also accompanied by a creepy cry, which sounds like it's coming from an analog phone. For many, Lisa is too scary a hurdle to overcome.
Now, at the dawn of video games, stories were the last thing that anyone was actually interested in. All we cared about was racking up points, blowing up spaceships, and saving the princess. But in this modern world, it seems like every game franchise focuses on world building, complex backstories, and intricate narratives. And since gamers have become so emotionally invested in these stories, the developers do all they can to keep things interesting. And that sometimes means pulling twists that seem like they have come out of nowhere. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 revealing video game moments that came out of nowhere. Number 10. Cole Phelps' affair, L.A. Noire. In L.A. Noire, you play as Detective Cole Phelps, a decorated cop who quickly works his way up the ranks of the police force after stumbling upon a massive conspiracy in the city. And throughout most of your playthrough, Phelps seems to be the only straight cop in Los Angeles. Sure, he's brash and confrontational, but he's a Boy Scout who does everything by the book. Because of his uncompromising integrity and unwavering loyalty to the cause, you really believe that Phelps is an upstanding guy. But late in the game, Phelps' career takes a nosedive after his affair with a German mistress is exposed. Because this story takes place immediately after World War II, the fact that Phelps, according to his detractors, slept with the enemy has him labeled as a traitor to his country. When you see how heartbroken his wife is after she kicks Phelps out of the house, you can't help but feeling like our so-called hero betrayed you as well. For all of his faults, we never thought that he would do something this heartless and this stupid, especially when he was so close to closing the biggest case of his career. Number 9. Mr. Blonde's identity, Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark follows a secret agent called Joanne Dark, who is tasked with stopping NSA Director Trent Easton from using alien tech to take over the world. Now, Perfect Dark has quite a few moments that left us completely blindsided, finding out that the doctor you're supposed to be protecting is an AI unit, teaming up with an extraterrestrial called Elvis, discovering that every level has a hidden slice of cheese in. But the one twist that nobody saw coming was the reveal of Trent Easton's right-hand man, Mr. Blonde. Even though this mysterious figure is always beside Trent, you don't really have a clue who he is. After Trent's plan to kill the president fails, Mr. Blonde tells him that he's outlived his usefulness before Blonde makes a move and Trent pulls a gun on him. But before Trent can shoot, Mr. Blonde transforms into a gigantic alien and guts him like a fish. Although the player knew Mr. Blonde was extremely dangerous, nobody was ready for this. Number 7. Clayface, Batman Arkham City. After the Joker learns he's dying, the demented jester decides to go out with a bang and devises a convoluted plan to destroy destroy Batman's life. Although Batman does all he can to stop the Joker's plans, he knows that there's something the Clown Prince of Crime isn't telling him. Because Batman's arch nemesis always has an ace up his sleeve, we know that the Joker has definitely got something else planned. And just before the climax, Ra's al Ghul impales the Joker with his sword, seemingly killing him. But to Batman's astonishment, as well as the players, the Joker stands back up, maniacally cackling. With little warning, the Joker mutates his body, revealing his true identity to be that of Clayface. The Joker then explains that his appearances throughout your mission were of Clayface, who took on the Joker's likeness in order to play the role of a lifetime. Like the best twists, this revelation leaves an impact because you feel like you should have seen it coming. If you used detective mode while facing the Joker earlier, you would have noticed that he had no bones since he was made out of clay. Another small but crucial moment is when Harley Quinn mentions how she can't tell which Joker is the real one. Only on a second playthrough do you realize that Harley was being literal and not figurative. Number 6. Your rival is the final boss, Pokemon Red and Blue. From the moment you begin Pokemon Red or Blue, it's repeatedly emphasized that the only way to become a true Pokemon champion is to defeat the Elite Four. Because your rival will remind you that he's better than you every time you bump into each other, this gives the player further incentive to defeat this quartet of Pokemon trainers. So, after spending hours wandering through the island, collecting dozens of Pokemon and thwarting the Elite Four, you breathe a sigh of relief, glad that your journey has come to an end. Unfortunately, that feeling only lasts about 30 seconds or so, because after you beat the Elite Four, their leader alerts you that another trainer defeated them just before you arrived, meaning that the only way to become the true champion is to beat him. And the person you have to face is your rival. Not only was this bait and switch final boss totally unexpected, it made the climax far more personal, since you had an emotional connection with your enemy. Number 5. Wheatley is worse than GLaDOS. Portal 2. Portal 2 begins with Chell awakening from her slumber, where she's greeted by a bumbling robot called Wheatley, voiced impeccably by Stephen Merchant. After you discover the murderous AI from the previous game GLaDOS has been reactivated, Wheatley bends over backwards to stop her from killing you. When he asks you to remove GLaDOS from her core and swap him in, it sounds like the first good idea that he's ever come up with. And after you accomplish this task, you half expect the game to end, now that the danger has been taken care of. But after Wheatley takes over GLaDOS's body and obtains full control of the complex, he becomes consumed with power and tries to kill you. Due to Stephen Merchant's light-hearted manner and friendly banter, you never had the slightest inkling that Wheatley would ever try to hurt you, not to mention become the main villain. Number 4. Time has reset more than once. Mortal Kombat 11. In this installment, the time-altering Titan Kronika concludes that the realms will collapse into themselves, compelling her to reset the entire multiverse. When Raiden tells her that he will find a way to stop her, Kronika reveals that she has already reset the timeline more times than she can count. Raiden realizes that the only way to defeat Kronika is if he teams up with Liu Kang. Because Kronika is aware of this, she has manipulated every timeline so Raiden and Liu Kang always find themselves at odds, forcing the deity to always kill his champion. Not only was this a fantastic twist, but it helped redeem Raiden after he seemingly committed an unforgivable act. Number 3. Who is Comstock? BioShock Infinite. In BioShock Infinite, your character Booker DeWitt arrives in the floating city of Columbia, which is ruled by the self-appointed prophet Zachary Hale Comstock. When Booker is accused of being the prophesized false shepherd, allies with a young woman called Elizabeth and does all he can to put an end to the dictator's reign. Now, at first you'd assume that Columbia stays afloat through some sort of hyper-advanced engineering, but as you progress, you discover the city always stays in the air through quantum mechanics. And you know what quantum mechanics always leads to in storytelling? That's right, parallel universes and time travel. Slowly but surely, BioShock Infinite starts launching truth bombs at the player. Elizabeth can travel to parallel universes. Elizabeth is Comstock's adopted daughter. The Latest twins are actually the same person, but from different realities. And while you're trying to wrap your head around all of these epiphanies, the game drops one more bombshell on you, that Comstock is a parallel version of Booker. Not only that, Elizabeth is your daughter. And while you're still reeling from those revelations, you're also informed that you have to die to ensure Comstock never exists. Although there are plenty of games where you discover that you're playing as the villain all along, BioShock Infinite did one better by making you the hero and the villain at the same time. Number 2. The Scratch. The Walking Dead. When you see Lee travel hundreds of miles with Clem in order to help her reunite with her parents, you can tell that this guy will literally go to the ends of the earth for her. After being on the road for weeks, Lee is about to reach the area where Clem's parents reside, but just before he arrives, Clementine is kidnapped by an unseen figure. Just when things look like they couldn't get any worse, Lee is attacked by a walker. Lee disposes of the flesh-eating creature within seconds, as he's done so many times before, but as Lee inspects his arm, he sees that the zombie left a tiny bite on his wrist, meaning that he's destined to become a walker. And because The Walking Dead has never had any issue with killing off likable characters, we should have seen this coming. But you grow so attached to Lee that you hope the developers would just make an exception just this once and allow him and Clem to ride off into the sunset. But sadly, this wasn't meant to be. And number 1, The Huddle. Inside. Inside follows an unnamed boy who's trying to access a research facility while being hunted by mysterious guards. Because the building is filled with mind control equipment and zombie-like humanoids, it seems that the facilitators are conducting an experiment to brainwash humanity. Because there's no dialogue Inside, it's clear that the developers didn't want to spell anything out, allowing the player to interpret the plot any way they saw fit. But whatever way you interpret the climax of this game, well, it's pretty messed up regardless. After you are about to reach the end of your arduous journey, you enter a water chamber where you discover the Huddle, a malformed blob composed of human limbs. As unsettling as this creature looks, what happens next is even more disturbing. Upon entering the globulous creature, you must use the Huddle's body to escape from the facility. Although it's never explained what this deformed organism is exactly, many believe the Huddle has been controlling the boy throughout the entire game, compelling him to enter the facility to free him from his aquatic prison. It's not known whether this creature is wicked or benevolent, nor whether the scientists intend to use it for good or evil, but what is known is your character was manipulated from the beginning and was never truly in control of their actions.
As games have become more refined at weaving emotionally complex stories with themes and plot points intended to resonate deeply, developers have likewise got better at using the interactivity of games to convey the rawness of these gut punches. These moments are the most effective when developers hold absolutely nothing back, turning interactive entertainment into something that's not necessarily fun. Major spoiler warnings are in effect because I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game moments you were supposed to hate. Number 10. Papers, Please. Choosing between food and heat. In Papers, Please, players take on the role of a checkpoint worker in a fictional totalitarian country. It's the player's job to decide which of the people who appear in front of their desk are allowed to enter and who get turned away at the border. However, this isn't as straightforward as it potentially sounds. The rules for entry become more convoluted each day, which consequently makes the required checks more time-consuming, with mistakes becoming easier to make. The more mistakes made, the less money players are awarded at the end of each shift. Over time, you can come away with less money than you started with. Things get worse when the players must also decide whether to use their earnings to pay for essentials like food and heat, or life-saving medicine for their family. Given how difficult the job becomes, though, this soon feels like an unwinnable task. As well as serving as a commentary on authoritarian regimes, Papers, Please likewise highlights the soul-crushing reality of working a thankless, low-paying job. Number 9. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 No Russian. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 made huge waves when it was released in 2009 for a multitude of reasons. The campaign was a fast-paced action spectacle, there were genuinely jaw-dropping revelations, and the multiplayer was better than ever. However, there was another reason this game got plenty of attention, and that was thanks to a controversial mission titled No Russian. In it, players took on the role of an undercover CIA agent who accompanies antagonist Makarov to a Moscow airport to participate in a mass shooting. When the elevator doors open, the terrorists open fire on the civilians, with you following suit. It's easy to see why this part of the game stirred up anger from the media at the time, despite Activision including an option to skip it entirely. The point is, though, that this level isn't supposed to be enjoyable. Whether players choose to fire their weapon or not, they're still forced to walk through the airport watching innocent people killed in cold blood. In stark contrast to the belief that this section encourages gun violence, the effect is the opposite. This is a truly harrowing level which reinforces the grim reality of attacks such as these. Number 8. Mafia 2 Going to Prison. After returning home from World War II, Vito Scaletta reunites with a lifelong friend who's since made inroads with the Clemente crime family. Through his friend's contacts, Vito begins to get some work for the organisation, eventually gaining a foothold within the criminal underworld. At this point, the player as Vito begins to earn some money that can be used to buy guns, cars, and even snazzy outfits. It's at this point, however, that Mafia 2 decides players aren't allowed to have nice things. Everything Vito has earned is taken away when he's sent to prison for stealing gas stamps. And this isn't the first time this happens either. Later, a house fire causes Vito to become penniless again. After working your way through the story to earn Vito's hard-earned wealth, having the game take it all away and force you to start over again on 2 separate occasions is understandably frustrating. However, these plot beats are nevertheless necessary in telling Vito's story. Vito's tale is a tragic one which underscores the risks of his chosen lifestyle. Despite being promised that the Mafia would be the solution to his problems, all it does is cause him more suffering. Number 7. Red Dead Redemption: John's Last Stand. Throughout the dozens of hours spent in the weathered cowboy boots of John Marston in Red Dead Redemption, players become well acquainted with the grizzled cowboy as he seeks his titular redemption. Formerly part of the notorious Vandalin gang, Marston is no stranger to shady business and nefarious actions, but he wants to put that life behind him so that he can forge a new one with his wife and son on his own ranch. To get the life Marston wants, however, the Pinkerton Detective Agency need him to kill his former accomplices. Despite his past, John is a genuinely good-hearted person who's willing to do whatever he can for his loved ones. With the last of his former gang gone, John has finally earned the quiet life he's been dreaming of. Unfortunately, the Pinkertons arrive to erase all traces of their communication. An epic shootout at John's ranch leads to a last stand where players have a chance to take out as many agents as they can, but it will never be enough. Marston is killed in a hail of bullets, creating a landmark tragic death in gaming history. Number 6. Dark Souls: Being Ambushed by the Asylum Demon. The first introduction to From Software's masterpiece is a handful of very weak enemies whose job is to teach newcomers the fundamentals of how to play. With only a broken weapon at this point to learn the basics, players will soon arrive in front of giant doors which signal the way forward. Upon entering, players are unceremoniously greeted by the Asylum Demon, Dark Souls' first boss, who will easily pummel inexperienced players into the ground with a ludicrously oversized hammer. To those not expecting this ambush, trying to fight this boss in the absence of a working weapon proves to be a gigantic obstacle that's nearly impossible to overcome. Yet everything in Dark Souls exists to teach players something, with this encounter being a trial by fire into what playing the game is all about. Whether you discover the small door to escape the fight for now, persevere until achieving victory, or get flattened and forced into a rethink, this unfair fight is designed to make you strategize. Number 5. Metal Gear Solid 4: The Microwave Tunnel. Iconic game developer and certified madman Hideo Kojima is no stranger to pushing the boundaries of what video games can be. Especially when it comes to his Metal Gear Solid series, Kojima has experimented with some strange mechanics to create some unforgettably bizarre moments. But not all of these quirky set pieces are as fun to play as the boss fight with Psycho Mantis, with Metal Gear 4's microwave tunnel sequence being one such example. For Solid Snake to stop Liquid Ocelot from launching a nuke, he must inject a computer virus into Ocelot's warship. To get to the core, however, he must traverse a corridor protected by strong microwave radiation. As soon as Snake enters the corridor, he's immediately overwhelmed by the radiation's intensity. Walking through the tunnel is a grueling physical process for him, and Kojima underscores the arduousness of his exertion through the gameplay. Not only does Snake's strained pace give players a sense of his agony, but players also struggle alongside him by frantically mashing button prompts to keep him moving. Meanwhile, a split screen depicts Snake's allies battling for their own survival. It's an effectively intense scene and you feel every second of it. Number 4. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice: Giving Up. Everything about the design of Hellblade is meticulously crafted to immerse players within the headspace of the titular protagonist as she makes her way into Helheim to save her lover's soul. The journey into Hell isn't going to be an easy one. Alongside the disembodied voices whirling inside her head, casting doubt upon her actions, Senua likewise comes up against other horrors and obstacles in her path. Her travels lead to an epic battle that stands between the protagonist and her goal, in which she'll face wave after wave of tough enemies. No matter how much she fights though, the enemies enemies will just keep coming. The voices in Senua's head will begin to tell her to give up, but our determination to succeed will keep us fighting alongside her. We've come as far as her and have no intentions of stopping now. However, this is a fight that Senua just can't win. To progress past this section, we must stop trying and put the controller down. Giving into defeat is the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do in games. Senua's struggle, though, is a tangible lesson that sometimes failure cannot be avoided, no matter how hard we try. Number 3. Psychonauts 2: Compton's Cook-Off. There is nothing that makes completing an objective in any video game more stressful than when developers include a time limit. This is exactly what happens in Psychonauts 2 when protagonist Raz enters the mind of Psychonaut founder Compton Ball and participates in a colourful cooking-based game show named Ram It Down. The goal is simple: collect, prepare and plate the necessary ingredients needed to make the required dish before the timer runs out. If you manage to present the meal to the sock puppet judges whilst the clock's still ticking, you'll be awarded with an alluring mystery prize. As the dishes become increasingly complex to create, meeting the deadline to claim the prize becomes a frustrating undertaking, but there was a good reason for this. Each of the minds Raz enters in this series highlights a specific area of mental health, with Compton's being used to represent the character's severe anxiety. While running around an obstacle course to appease overly critical judges is a creative and fitting metaphor for this issue, the developers likewise offer some advice on how to deal with being overwhelmed by having you take breaks between rounds. Number 2. A Plague Tale: Requiem, Hugo. After narrowly escaping the devastating rat plague at the end of the previous game, it's not long before siblings Amicia and Hugo de Rune are thrown headfirst into the chaos when the man-eating rats re-emerge to upend their lives once more. Surrounded by death and devastation, the pair set out on a mission to find a cure for the sickness that's slowly killing Hugo and finally put an end to the plague before it's too late. Much like the first game, Amicia and Hugo endure a harrowing ordeal which puts their survival and bond to the test. After going on this journey with them, it's impossible not to become emotionally invested in their plight. Being a plague tale though, things don't get any better for Amicia at the end. With the sickness now having taken over her brother, she realises that the only way to stop the plague is to kill him. Struggling to hold back tears, Amicia takes out her sling and players must take aim at the youngster's head before delivering the fatal blow. Killing a character that players have spent so much time with is always an ordeal, but this action crystallises the losses they've faced along the way into one last scene. Number 1. The Last of Us Part 2: The Final Showdown. Much like its predecessor, The Last of Us Part 2 held absolutely nothing back as it wove its gritty tale of revenge. With its visceral combat and subject matter that didn't really shy away from difficult themes, there are parts of this title that were simply unpleasant. After Ellie witnesses the death of her adoptive father Joel at the start of the game, she embarks on a deeply personal quest for revenge against those who have killed him. Ellie is single-minded in her goal throughout her journey, with each person she kills bringing her closer to ringleader Abby, who has her own reasons for doing what she did. Even when Abby spares Ellie's life, Ellie still can't rid herself of her desire for revenge. At the pair's next meeting, the stage is set for the fight that players have been waiting for, however things play out differently than expected. Moments away from getting her revenge, Ellie understands the meaninglessness of the violence and allows Abby to leave. She returns home to find her family is gone and that she's now unable to play her guitar. Though the finale is purposefully anticlimactic, the bittersweet gut punch it delivers is more powerful than any final boss fight.
Historically, video games have been seen as mostly a thing for kids, which led to the first few years of the gaming space being centered around titles that were designed specifically with kids in mind. Thankfully, grown-ups have become more and more commonplace as the industry has continued to evolve, though that hasn't stopped a steady stream of kid-friendly games from continuing to hit shelves that even these adults are able to sink their teeth into. Because of this hybridization over who titles are being designed for, even the friendliest looking game can house moments that aren't necessarily what a concerned Mumsnet user would expect. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 horrifying moments in children's video games. Number 10. Dead Hand: The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. When it comes to creepy moments in The Legend of Zelda, most people see Majora's Mask as the creme de la creme of the series. This has led to its predecessor flying under the radar, despite packing some punches of its own. The bottom of the well in Kakariko Village is probably the creepiest location in the whole game, with the murky cistern housing baddies like the skeletal Big Skull Chulas and mummified Gibdos. The most nightmare-inducing part of this level is reserved for its boss, Dead Hand. Even for a fantasy game, it's astonishing and, let's face it, a little disturbing just how much attention has been put in to ensuring this guy is absolutely horrifying. A zombified head with an unnaturally large jaw and blood-red blotches across its pale skin, Dead Hands have 4 to 6 disembodied hands that it uses to suddenly snag any unsuspecting players. The way in which it skulks around like a slug is what especially gave this article's author nightmares back in the day. The fact that Ocarina of Time has had this enduring legacy of being the brighter of the two N64 titles mean interactions like Dead Hand earn extra points for being far more surprising. Other dead hands can be found in Ganon's castle and the Shadow Temple, although the combination of this zombie burrowing in the depths of a sewer surrounding make it the most chilling. Number 9. Crying Blood. Zack and Wiki, Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure. The Nintendo Wii is famous for many things, and one of those is not having a slew of especially gritty games. Designed to slot alongside the gimmicks that are motion controls and Mii's, the Wii was a system designed for casual gamers across the whole family. And for the most part, Capcom's Zack and Wiki Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure fits into this criteria nicely. A bright and vibrant game seeing players take control of a young pirate and his monkey best friend as they solve various point-and-click puzzles, lots of kids presumably would have been given this as a harmless gift from their parents. And almost all of those players will have received a massive fright when going to the Bell Tower of Requiem. Needing to make sure the moon is directly shining on it, players will encounter a small fountain with a woman's face on it. Pulling on it will suddenly have the woman's eyes open, start bleeding from them, and then begin to scream. A decent jump scare in a game that looks more like a kid-friendly cartoon. Number 8. Burning Orphanage, Psychonauts. For the most part, Psychonauts is exactly the kind of bright, light-hearted, fun jaunt that lots of kids would have in their gaming collection. The visuals are reminiscent of a Tim Burton flick, and the gameplay premise of psychic protagonist Raz exploring the colourful minds of his peers in an effort to help them move on from their fears wouldn't look out of place in a child's book. Yet there are some dark and sinister secrets lurking around the game that are far from the sorts of things some parents would want their children exposed to. In the level Mila's Dance Party, players are transported to a world full of non-stop disco jiving. Get it out in classic 70s clobber, Mila is the sort of carefree gal everyone wants to hang out with on a Friday night. However, she does make a note of telling the player there are certain rooms that are off limits, saying that to enter them would be to crash the party and not to do so. Exploring these rooms will reveal Mila's harrowing past. Players will be presented with a hellish experience filled with tormented souls, crying out lines like, "Help us, Mila, why did you let us die?" Turns out Mila was the owner of an orphanage, and when it burned down, all the children inside perished in the flames. Appearances can be deceiving, but this was one shocking twist few players could have been equipped for. Number 7. Zero, Kirby's Dream Land 3. To be fair, the Kirby franchise is one that specializes in having its bright and colorful aesthetic cover some pretty profound themes. Nevertheless, it's hard to think of a series that is as cuddly and colorful as the one involving this pink Nintendo mascot. The last game on the SNES that has since been ported over to the Wii and Wii U, Dream Land 3, is one of the most beloved entries to the franchise, and for the most part, it matches the kid-friendly aesthetics of the series perfectly. However, the game also features a secret boss who fully pulls apart those pleasant themes. Zero is a floating eyeball that, the more damage players do to it, will see it start to leak blood across the screen. In fact, after dealing even more damage to Zero, players will be treated to the sight of the boss's pupil splattering out of its socket. It's a boss battle that comes out of absolutely nowhere and is well worth its weight as one of the most jarring sequences in the Kirby franchise. Number 6. Microwaving Hamsters, Maniac Mansion. Despite the violent-sounding title and spooky elements present, Maniac Mansion was a favorite video game for kids looking for something a bit racier than the duck hunts and punch-outs of the late 80s. The game went through several reworks for the Nintendo Entertainment System, with Nintendo being concerned that the themes might not make the game kid-friendly enough. But by and large, the story of a group of 6 teens navigating dangers and solving puzzles across a mad scientist's house generally steered clear of anything too terrifying. However, one now infamous scene that even the low-grade slasher flicks of the day hadn't thought of obviously slipped through these cracks. If playing as either Sid or Razor, the player can pick up the pet hamster belonging to the scientist's son, Weird Ed. With these particular masochists, there's an opportunity to bring the little fur ball down to the kitchen, stuff it in the microwave, and wait as blood and guts sprays the walls. It's a twisted moment that comes out of nowhere, and given the limitations of games around, was undoubtedly one of the most gruesome sights players had seen at the time. Number 5. Level 14. Lemmings. When the original Lemmings hit shelves in 1991, it seemed like Psygnosis had managed to hit the nail on the head when it came to creating some real mindless fun for kids everywhere at the time. Spawned from the urban myth that all these small rodents follow each other off on a death march together, the titular mascots provided the perfect protagonist for a game based on overcoming obstacles and getting to the end goal. Even with the ability to have these little guys blast themselves into oblivion, the game does a solid job in keeping things on the harmlessly slapstick side of things. Except for one instance, Level 14. Level 14 Menacing set players off on a hellish-inspired trek across some of the most bizarre and legitimately unsettling landscapes able to fit on the Amiga. Skulls with worms coming out of the eye sockets, dismembered limbs sticking out of all parts of the screen, and blood dripping down from the ceiling round out what amounts to a fairly jarring moment from a game that we can imagine a lot of parents just picked up for their kids, not thinking much of it. Number 4. River Twigs, Super Paper Mario. Horrifying and Super Mario are two phrases that generally we would never put together. Luigi's Mansion had a couple of legit creepy moments, but that was the whole point of the game at the end of the day. But there's one moment in 2007's Super Paper Mario that manages to eclipse anything that game could throw up. The River Twigs is a part of the underwear in Paper Mario lore and is said to be made up of the souls of lost sinners, in what is an obvious reference to the river Styx in Greek mythology. During their time on and in the river, players will encounter underhands, invisible skeletal hands that lunge out in an attempt to drag the player down to a watery grave. It's one of the most memorable portions of the game, but what elevates this otherwise creepy cartoony sequence to a more traumatizing level is the soundtrack that accompanies it. Heavy feedback and audio effects are used to distort the sounds made by the inhabitants of the river, with some gamers even claiming there are messages and cries for help nested in. Creepy stuff. Number 3. The Cave of Bad Dreams, Rayman 2. Rayman 2 is the franchise's big jump to 3D and largely follows a fairly light-hearted, child-friendly tone, featuring Rayman teaming up with the fairies, lums, amphibians, and teensies to save the fairy glade from robotic pirates. Most of the game is presented with warm colors and fantastical themes, making it a particularly popular game with a certain generation. However, one notable level in the game gave almost every single one of these gamers nightmares during a playthrough. Also known as the Kingdom of the Dead, players travel to the realm seeking the elixir of life. The Cave of Bad Dreams is where Polocus's, the major spirit of the world, nightmares are housed and guarded by Jano, a terrifying floating head with one eye and plenty of sharp teeth. This level is one of the most memorable in the game, but it's definitely also one of the most hair-raising. Jano is constantly chasing players, with his teeth getting bigger and bigger on the screen to ramp up the terror even more. Throw on top all of the skulls, trapped souls, and monsters lining the walls, and the Cave of Bad Dreams is still one of the most chilling levels most kids have ever tackled. Number 2. Main Menu, Sonic CD. The Sonic series was already well on its way to becoming a very popular franchise with cool older siblings everywhere when Sonic CD arrived in 1993. Universally praised upon release, the game featured cutscenes for the first time, characters like Amy and Metal Sonic, and smartly utilized time travel to present different variants of levels depending on how players perform. And yet, it's a strange and undoubtedly unsettling hidden Easter egg in the main menu that Sonic CD has truly become infamous for. By pressing down, 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 left, right, A in the main menu, players will be taken to a sound test screen. By inputting the numbers 46, 12, and 25, they'll then be greeted by a jarring screen of 3 rows of Sonic images, only with the hedgehog's face replaced by a creepy-looking human one. The Japanese characters on the screen translate roughly to "Fun is infinite with Sega Enterprises," Majin, with Majin being a term used to describe a devil or demon. Throw in some echoing laughter from Dr. Robotnik that can be heard over it, and it caps off one of the most chilling images from the 90s. Number 1. Gygus, Earthbound. For the most part, Earthbound is a cheery video game filled with colourful visuals, an exotic soundtrack, and the sort of humour that made it incredibly popular with younger audiences, especially in its native Japan. Which only serves to make its final boss fight that much more surprising and downright chilling. Also referred to as the Universal Cosmic Destroyer and embodiment of evil, Gygas' sole goal is to chuck everyone and everything into a never-ending void of darkness. Gygas' appearance in Earthbound is one of those ones that's made even more terrifying for being a product of its time. The glitchy sound effects, hazy red-black colors, and distorted sequence of tormented skulls across the screen make for a truly nightmarish experience. In the game, Gygas' insanity means that players have to deal with its random attacks and unsettling murmurings, all while trying to overcome their own nerves to beat the thing. It's an encounter that wouldn't be out of place in a Resident Evil entry, so how it ended up in a game based around 4 children setting off on a lighthearted adventure, we'll never know.
Death is a prevalent part of a good number of narratives, and video games have plenty of them. Some of them go down in history as either the best or the worst, but regardless of their quality, there's another factor to consider. Did you see this coming? Was it an out-of-nowhere shock, or did it feel like a painful inevitability? Knowing a character is destined for a personal bad ending doesn't necessarily detract from the impact of it, of course. If anything, we might spend minutes or hours on the edge of our seat waiting for it because it's been so heavily alluded to. Massive spoiler warnings, of course, because I'm Cy for What Culture, and here are the 10 exact moments you knew video game characters were doomed. Number 10, Cortana explains rampancy, Halo 4. One of the most powerful storyline beats of Halo 3 is the stoic soldier Master Chief risking it all to save his AI companion Cortana. At the end of the game, after saving the universe, the pair find themselves stranded somewhere in space. John 117 enters stasis and Cortana stays active to scout for potential rescue or danger. 4 years later, Cortana wakes Master Chief from his slumber as they are sucked into a gravity well down to the shield world of Requiem. In the process, Cortana shows flashes of malfunction. Upon touching ground, she explains to the Master Chief that AI are only designed to work for 7 years, after which they begin to think themselves to death. At this point, Cortana has been in service for 8 years. Despite the Chief's continuous pained pleas through the story, the fact that the pair are so far away from Earth, and Cortana's creator, whom Chief hastily believes can help, and they're distracted by a new threat, things can only end badly. Cortana never fills John's head with false promise, he does that to himself. Players who have been guided by Cortana for 3 games at this point are not as blinded by the possibility of losing her as Master Chief is. Her heroic sacrifice at the end of the game is beautiful but entirely expected. Let's just not talk about her unnecessary and awful resurrection in Halo 5. Number 9, Rost's goodbye, Horizon Zero Dawn. The early story setup for Horizon Zero Dawn hinges on Aloy and her adopted father Rost, 2 outcasts from the Nora tribe. Rost, of course, acts as a bit of a tutorial character for the player getting to grips with the controls, and a mentor for everything Aloy needs. When she chooses to take part in a trial known as the Proving, Rost says his goodbyes to Aloy because it's Nora tribe rule to never associate with outsiders. If Aloy succeeds, they can never see each other again. The player has a few ways to respond to Rost's soft, mournful parting words, but whether that's done in anger or sadness, it's very clear that they're not going to get a chance for another conversation. After all, dying father figures is storytelling 101, and at this point, what else does Rost have to offer to the story other than further impetus for Aloy's journey? Players have been tutorialized and have spent enough time in the opening area. This is clearly the moment where the game opens up, and there needs to be a springboard of momentum. So of course, players are hardly surprised when the trial goes awry and Rost, who jumps in to help, winds up sacrificing himself for Aloy's safety. Thanks, Dad. It wasn't exactly a shock, but it's still a nice thing to do. Number 8, Zombie Brad, Resident Evil 2. In Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, players take on the role of Jill Valentine as she attempts to escape the doomed Raccoon City, now running amok with virus-carrying monsters. To make matters worse, she's being pursued by the titular Nemesis, a hulking brute with a bone or 206 to pick with the remaining members of STARS. The arrival of the tyrant is described by Jill's colleague Brad Vickers, who's very clearly playing the role of cannon fodder to prove Nemesis's power. However, players knew that Brad was not long for escape because of the game's predecessor that released 18 15 months earlier. There's a collectible file in Resident Evil 2 that actually details that Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine and Barry Burton plan to fly out to Europe to take down Umbrella's base. This leaves Rebecca Chambers and Brad Vickers unaccounted for. However, if players make it through the game's opening without grabbing an item, they'll find the truth. Shuffling outside the Raccoon City Police Department is a zombified Brad Vickers having succumbed to the T-virus. Whilst Brad was immediately recognised as KIA, it wasn't until Resident Evil 3 Nemesis that we found out exactly how. Skewered by the leather daddy tyrant Nemesis in the police station forecourt. What a way to go. Number 7, Who's Afraid of a Little Thunder? Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. This entry is less about the "oh he's definitely dead" moment and more of the "oh he's definitely dead and this is why." After all, Volgin is one of the main antagonists of Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, and more than this hadn't appeared in its preceding sequels, so he was destined for death. Okay, this isn't technically the last we see of him in the MGS timeline, it's worth talking about this masterful piece of foreshadowing though. Throughout the campaign, the electrokinetic Colonel Volgin will react to stormy weather by uttering the phrase "Kurabara Kurabara," which is essentially a Japanese equivalent to knock on wood. In the wacky world of Hideo Kojima, this is even shown to potentially have an effect, as it appears to clear up heavy rainfall and part the clouds at least once. However, coming close to the end of the game, a storm gathers over Volgin. This time he doesn't recite his catchphrase and instead scoffs, barking "Who's afraid of a little thunder?" Nothing Kojima does is accidental, however, and 3 games into the series, some gamers would pick up that this is definitely going somewhere. That somewhere is 300 million volts to Volgin's body as he's inevitably struck by lightning, causing him to combust. I guess being superstitious was his real superpower. Number 6, Anything for Trish, Infamous. Infamous stars Cole McGrath, an unfortunate courier who gets exposed to a mysterious blast that gives him superhero or villain powers. However, the explosion causes mass devastation. Trish, Cole's girlfriend, blames him for the death of her sister Amy, fracturing their relationship, which our protagonist spends the game trying to fix, while Trish acts hostile. At the end of the mission, Anything for Trish, she forgives Cole, and then come the words, "I want us to be together again." Uh-oh. In fairness to Infamous, it does throw players off the scent. The next time you meet Trish, she's in grave danger, but the player is presented with an all-important choice. They can either be pragmatic and save 6 doctors from certain doom, or sacrifice them to selfishly choose Trish. However, even if players are taking Cole down the route of the bad guy in a brilliant act of subversion, Trish will always be at the opposite location to the one you visit, ensuring her death. Which is all well and good, but her death was ensured when she finally patched things up with Cole. You don't do these things before the final mission, where things are still at stake, otherwise you become the stakes. As impactful as Trish's death is, especially if you chose her over the doctors, she had nothing more to give and was always fated to die. Number 5, Dom finds Maria, Gears of War 2. Whilst Dominic Santiego's death occurs in Gears of War 3, it had been a long time coming. The character's entire drive through the first half of the original Gears trilogy is searching for his missing wife. When he encountered her midway through Gears 2 as a broken and scarred woman who no longer recognised him, every player knew that the countdown to his own tragic end was truly on. It was a brilliantly powerful and human moment and added stakes going into the story of Gears 3. Dom's reaction to feeling forced to euthanize his own wife is rage, as he says himself, "I want to kill them all." The original Gears of War trailer famously was set to a piano cover of Mad World, which only finally appears in the games in Gears of War 3, when Dom decides to sacrifice himself to allow his squad mates to escape a firefight. As it's just the piano, the player is left to hear those lyrics in their own head. "I find it kind of funny, I find it kind of sad, the dreams in which I'm dying are the best I've ever had." Knowing Dom had nothing left in the world doesn't make it any less powerful to watch the co-op Player 2 character shout into the sky to his late wife as he goes out in a literal blaze of glory. Chills. Number 4, Lee Gets Bitten, The Walking Dead. For a little while, Telltale were the masters of simple but effective narrative-driven video games. However, to this day, very few of their releases have matched the height of The Walking Dead's first season of episodic chapters. The game centers on criminal escapee Lee and lonely lost girl Clementine, who band together during the zombie apocalypse to search for the latter's parents. Across the adventure, players are forced to make uncomfortable and harrowing choices that are guaranteed to make them allies as well as enemies. Most chapters, in fact, have a final decision that can yield a variety of results, most of which end in someone dying so that someone else can live. The end of episode 4 is where this format begins to change. Lee, bitten by a walker, is done for. Everyone who has seen zombie media knows where this is going. And so players waited nearly 2 months for the concluding episode, appropriately titled No Time Left. left. This final act of the story has some interesting decisions, but its climax simply asks players if Clementine should shoot Lee and stop him from turning into a zombie or not. He's dead either way. According to the Walking Dead wiki, 95% of players decided to put Lee out of his misery, and they probably spent the last 2 months leading up to that release thinking about it. Number 3, Kasuga and Arakawa reunited. Yakuza like a dragon. When it comes to plotlines driven by important deaths, often father figures, you don't get many franchises that use the trope more than Yakuza. As such, to see this happen again in the 7th entry wasn't exactly shocking. After all, Like a Dragon starts with flashbacks that show crime lord Masumi Arakawa seeking revenge for the murder of his father, which is exactly where protagonist Ichiban Kasuga's storyline is also headed. At the very least, the game holds out on this for a good length of time. Instead, the game is driven by the apparent betrayal of Kasuga at the hands of his beloved leader Arakawa. Being an abandoned orphan, Arakawa is the closest Kasuga has ever had to a father and will do anything for him, quite literally, including 18 years of jail time. As the game's final act begins, the two are reunited and share a long scene together where Ichiban continues to devote himself to Arakawa, despite being told that he was lied to about why exactly he took the fall. The latter alludes to some pretty major considerations that the figure in father figure may well be superfluous. Ichiban's passion that they can finally reconnect against Arakawa's defeated demeanor spells out storyline disaster. Sure enough, surprising no one, Ichiban awakes to find Arakawa has been assassinated, and the cycle continues. Number 2, a fork in the road, Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2 as a prequel does a lot of great things to set up and flesh out the story of the first game. Considering his absence from RDR1, players certainly had reason to believe that protagonist Arthur Morgan would die along the way, most likely amidst one of the many shootouts prominent through the Old West. Then again, it wasn't guaranteed. Perhaps he could ride off into the sunset. No, actually, that's not going to happen. Instead, he contracts one of the most devastating illnesses that ravaged the turn of the 20th century. In retrospect, there are so many little subtle hints. Rewatching the confrontation that leads to Arthur getting sick shows that his victim is sputtering from more than just a beating. On Arthur's return to Strauss, the music highlights a rasping melody that scrapes along the neck of a double bass, itself sounding like chesty coughs. Of course, Arthur's sickness is reflected in the gameplay too, as he loses weight and strength. The real moment of realization comes when control is taken from the player, and after he collapses, Morgan is told he has tuberculosis. Suddenly, everything makes sense. There's no legendary shootout, and there certainly isn't a chance in hell Arthur is riding off when the credits roll. Hearing the word tuberculosis was a death sentence in 1899, and players knew that there was no escaping this one. And number 1, survive Halo Reach. One of the first pieces of conversational dialogue in the original Halo briefly mentions Reach without really saying much about it. In fact, the colony doesn't get much explanation in the game itself, largely as it would slow everything down. Instead, the rise and fall of Reach is explained in the Halo books. However, as their swan song of the franchise, original developers Bungie decided to set an immediate prequel to the original Halo on Reach. Whilst the marketing for the game certainly had a gloomy tone, it wasn't necessarily the case that all was lost, right? I mean, Halo 3 had similarly dour trailers, but the game ended on a bittersweet victory at least. But then, after spending a moment to pick out your favourite armour styles and colours, the game literally opens on a shot of your broken helmet laying abandoned on a barren planet. This was not going to be a smooth ride. Watching all of your teammates in Noble Team perish over the course of the story was bad enough, but the final survive objective at the end of the game brought it all full circle. Players face down enemies for as long as they can with no real goal besides live. Players succeed in their duty setting up for the events of the original Halo, but protagonist Noble 6 meets their inescapable fate as the planet is completely overrun.